Imagine being betrayed by the very people who were supposed to love and protect you. Kicked out of your home as a teenager, abandoned because of false rumors spread by someone you thought you could trust. This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's a journey of resilience, justice, and triumph. Welcome to Unheard Stories, the channel where we uncover the most shocking real-life tales of betrayal and redemption. If you're here for the first time, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. These are the stories that deserve to be heard, and today's episode is one you'll never forget. Today, we're diving into the life of a young woman who was cast out of her family's life as a teenager due to lies and manipulation. Forced to fend for herself, she clawed her way to success against all odds. But when her parents, who had abandoned her, returned years later with demands, she didn't just say no. She gave them a response they never expected. This story is about betrayal so deep it cuts to the bone, and a revenge so powerful it leaves no question of where justice lies. From the outside, our family seemed picture perfect. 2 parents, 2 children, a comfortable home. Everything looked ideal. But beneath the surface, the reality was far different. My name is Hannah, and for as long as I can remember, I was treated as the unwanted one. My twin brother, Ethan, was the golden child, the one my parents adored and placed on a pedestal. And me, I was the shadow, ignored, criticized, and treated like an afterthought in my own family. Ethan could do no wrong. If he scored well on a test, my parents would throw a celebratory dinner. If he struggled with something, they would rally behind him, offering endless support and encouragement. Meanwhile, my achievements were brushed aside, and my struggles were seen as weaknesses. I wasn't lazy or incompetent. I just had different interests. While Ethan buried himself in books, striving for academic excellence, I was drawn to sports and creativity. I loved being outdoors, playing soccer with friends, and sketching in my notebook during quiet afternoons. But in my parents' eyes, none of that mattered. My hobbies were unimportant distractions, and my achievements were never enough. They wanted me to be like Ethan, studious, obedient, and focused solely on academics. Their constant comparisons were like tiny daggers, chipping away at my self-esteem one remark at a time. "Why can't you be more like your brother, Hannah?" became a refrain I heard daily. The favoritism wasn't just subtle. It was glaringly obvious. On our birthdays, Ethan would get extravagant parties with his friends, complete with balloons, gifts, and a lavish cake. I, on the other hand, was lucky to even get a small slice of store-bought cake. While Ethan had sleepovers and trips to amusement parks, I was barely allowed to invite a friend over. If I dared to ask for the same treatment, I was met with excuses. "We can't afford it right now," or worse, "You don't deserve it if your grades aren't as good as Ethan's." I still remember the pain of watching Ethan unwrap his gifts while I sat empty-handed, pretending not to care. My parents' blatant favoritism wasn't just hurtful. It was isolating. I began to feel like an outsider in my own home, invisible and unloved. Despite the lack of support at home, I had a strong sense of identity. I was outgoing, friendly, and loved meeting new people. I thrived in social settings and quickly built a wide circle of friends at school. Unlike Ethan, who was introverted and struggled to connect with others, I found joy in forming connections and sharing experiences. My teachers often praised me for my enthusiasm and creativity, which only fueled my desire to explore the world beyond the confines of my family's narrow expectations. My dream was to become an artist or a professional soccer player, 2 paths that my parents dismissed as childish fantasies. "You'll never make a living drawing pictures," my father scoffed when I showed him one of my sketches. "And sports? That's just a phase. Focus on your studies if you want to amount to anything." Their words hurt, but they also fueled a quiet rebellion within me. I didn't want to be like Ethan, chained to their expectations and living only for their approval. I wanted to carve my own path, even if it meant facing their disapproval every step of the way. My brother, Ethan, wasn't just the favorite, he thrived in the role. He wasn't overtly cruel in the beginning, but he reveled in the attention and privileges that came with being the golden child. As we grew older, he began to use my parents' bias to his advantage. If he made a mistake, he knew he could shift the blame onto me and face no consequences. If he wanted something, he knew that all he had to do was ask, while I had to fight tooth and nail for even the smallest favor. The imbalance in our treatment became more pronounced with each passing year. If Ethan skipped a chore or stayed out late, it was brushed off with a boys will be boys attitude. But if I so much as forgot to set the table, I was scolded for being lazy and irresponsible. The disparity was exhausting and demoralizing, but no one seemed to notice or care how it was affecting me. By the time I reached my teenage years, the weight of my parents' favoritism had taken a significant toll on my mental health. I began to doubt myself, wondering if I was truly as worthless as they made me feel. Their constant criticism eroded my confidence, and I found myself shrinking into the background, trying to avoid their attention altogether. It was easier to stay out of their way than to endure another lecture about my shortcomings. But even in the darkest moments, I clung to the small sparks of joy that kept me going. My grandmother was my only ally, the one person who saw me for who I truly was. Whenever she visited, she brought me my favorite chocolates and slipped a few dollars into my pocket, whispering, "Treat yourself, sweetheart. You deserve it." Her kindness was a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't completely alone. Even as I tried to hold on to hope, the cracks in our family dynamic were growing deeper. Ethan's jealousy over my social life, my parents' constant disapproval, and my own desire for independence were setting the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. Little did I know, the betrayal that would shatter my life was just around the corner. As we grew older, the cracks in my relationship with Ethan deepened. His jealousy, which had simmered quietly in the background for years, began to boil over. While I struggled to gain our parents' approval, I found solace in my friendships. I was well-liked at school, approachable, and surrounded by friends who appreciated me for who I was. Ethan, on the other hand, struggled to connect with people. He was introverted and socially awkward, which only fueled his resentment when he saw how easily I could make friends and build relationships. The turning point came on our 14th birthday. My parents, as usual, organized a grand party for Ethan, inviting all his classmates and showering him with gifts. But when the day arrived, not a single one of his friends showed up. For reasons I never fully understood, they all bailed on him. Meanwhile, my friends surprised me with an impromptu celebration, taking me out for ice cream and making me feel loved. Ethan was furious. I could see the anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. He felt humiliated, and in his mind, I was the reason for his embarrassment. That was the day he decided to turn his jealousy into a weapon. Ethan didn't lash out at me directly. Instead, he chose a more insidious approach. He began spreading rumors about me at school, portraying me as a spoiled brat who thought I was better than everyone else. He told people that I was manipulative, mean-spirited, and prone to fits of anger. The worst part was the lie he told about me being physically abusive toward him at home. To make his lies more convincing, Ethan went to disturbing lengths. He would purposefully injure himself, giving himself a black eye or bruising his arm, and then tell anyone who would listen that I was responsible. "Hannah got mad at me last night and hit me," he'd say with a pained expression. First, no one believed him. After all, I'd never shown any signs of being violent. But Ethan was persistent, and over time his fabricated stories began to stick. The rumors spread like wildfire. Whispers filled the hallways, and I began to notice the shift in how people treated me. Friends who used to greet me warmly started avoiding me. Invitations to group hangouts stopped coming. Even my closest friends began to distance themselves, their eyes filled with doubt every time they looked at me. One day, I confronted my best friend, Sarah, to ask why she was acting so cold toward me. She hesitated before finally telling me the truth. "Ethan's been saying some pretty awful things about you," she admitted. "He said you hurt him, Hannah, and he has bruises to prove it." I was stunned. The betrayal cut deep, leaving me speechless. Ethan, my twin brother, the person who should have had my back, was actively tearing me down. I tried to defend myself, but Sarah's expression made it clear that she didn't believe me. "I don't know what to think anymore," she said quietly before walking away. The isolation was unbearable. I went from being surrounded by friends to eating lunch alone in the cafeteria. Teachers began to look at me differently, their gazes filled with suspicion. One even pulled me aside after class to ask if everything was okay at home. I wanted to scream the truth, to tell them that I was the victim of Ethan's lies, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. The damage was already done. At home, things were no better. My parents, already inclined to believe the worst about me, took Ethan's side without question. If he came home with a bruise, they didn't ask how it happened. They assumed I was responsible. "Hannah, what is wrong with you?" my mom yelled one evening after Ethan walked into the house with a black eye. "Why can't you just leave your brother alone?" "I didn't do it," I protested, my voice trembling with frustration and fear. But my dad shut me down with a single cold glare. "We've had enough of your excuses, Hannah. If this happens again, there will be serious consequences." I couldn't take it anymore. One evening, I cornered Ethan in his room and demanded an explanation. "Why are you doing this to me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I've never done anything to hurt you. Why are you spreading these lies?" Ethan smirked, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "You've always had everything handed to you," he said. "Your friends, your popularity, you don't deserve it. Now people are seeing the real you." His words left me speechless. The person I'd shared my childhood with, the person who knew me better than anyone, was actively trying to destroy my life, and he was enjoying it. When I tried to explain the situation to my parents, they dismissed me entirely. "Ethan has no reason to lie," my mom said. "Maybe if you weren't so difficult, things wouldn't be this way." The tension at home had been building for weeks, and I could feel something brewing. Ethan's lies about me had escalated, and my parents were on edge. Every time he came home with a bruises he likely gave himself, they would glare at me like I was a criminal. No matter how much I denied it, my parents had already decided I was guilty. One evening, Ethan walked into the house with a fresh black eye. My mother gasped and rushed to him, her voice trembling with concern. "Ethan, what happened?" "It's Hannah," he said, his voice laced with fake sadness. "She got mad again and hit me." I froze. I had been in my room for hours, sketching quietly, and hadn't even seen Ethan since breakfast. "That's a lie," I shouted, my voice shaking with frustration. But my protests fell on deaf ears. My father stormed into my room, his face red with fury. "Enough, Hannah," he yelled. "We've tolerated this for too long." "I didn't do anything," I cried, tears streaming down my face. "He's lying. Can't you see that?" Ethan stood behind them, a smug smirk on his face. He had won, and he knew it. "You're a danger to this family," my father said coldly. "We can't live like this anymore." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm saying you're leaving," he replied. "Tonight." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "You're throwing me out?" "Based on his lies. Don't make this harder than it needs to be," my mother added, her tone dismissive. "Pack your things, Hannah." I looked at Ethan, hoping to see some shred of guilt, but all I saw was triumph. He had wanted me gone, and now he was getting exactly what he wanted. As I packed my belongings, I tried one last time to reason with my parents. "How can you do this to your own daughter?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "You're throwing me out because of him? Don't you see what he's doing?" "Ethan has no reason to lie," my mother said, her voice tight. "You've always been jealous of him, Hannah. Maybe it's time you faced the consequences of your actions." "My actions?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "I've done nothing but try to survive in this house. You've always taken his side, no matter what. One day you'll see the truth, and it'll be too late." But they didn't respond. My father simply opened the front door and motioned for me to leave. "We've made our decision," he said. "It's for the best." "For the best?" I whispered bitterly as I stepped out into the cold night. "You'll regret this." Standing alone on the sidewalk, clutching a bag of hastily packed belongings, I felt a wave of despair unlike anything I'd ever known. My own family had abandoned me. I was just 17 years old, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to, except my grandmother. With shaking hands, I called her, my voice breaking as I explained what had happened. They kicked me out, I sobbed. They believed Ethan's lies and told me to leave. Her response was immediate and firm. Stay right where you are, sweetheart, she said. I'm coming to get you. When she arrived, she pulled me into a hug, and for the first time that night, I felt a small measure of comfort. You're safe now, she said softly. They don't deserve you, Hannah. You're better than this. My grandmother took me in without hesitation, giving me a room in her modest but cozy home. She listened as I poured out everything, the lies, the favoritism, the betrayal. You've always been strong, she said, holding my hand. And you'll get through this too. This isn't the end for you. It's just the beginning. Her words were the lifeline I desperately needed. Over the next few weeks, she helped me enroll in community college and encouraged me to pursue my passion for art. She gave me her old laptop, saying, It's not much, but it'll help you get started. That small gesture meant the world to me. Living with her was a stark contrast to the life I had left behind. She treated me with kindness and respect, reminding me every day that I was worth something. With her support, I began to imagine a future where I could thrive, free from the toxic environment I had escaped. Being kicked out was the most painful experience of my life, but it was also the moment that set me free. Free from their judgment, their control, and their endless comparisons. For the first time, I had the chance to build a life on my own terms, and I wasn't going to waste it. Initial struggles. When I first moved in with my grandmother, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, but it was quickly overshadowed by fear. The security I had taken for granted was gone. I was no longer part of a family structure, no matter how dysfunctional it had been. Now it was just me, starting over with nothing but a suitcase of clothes and the support of my grandmother. The emotional weight of being disowned was crushing. Nights were the hardest. As I lay in the small guest room of her home, I replayed the events over and over in my mind, questioning if I could have done anything differently. The anger, the sadness, the sense of betrayal, they all mixed into a swirling storm inside me, making sleep almost impossible. Financially, I was also in a precarious position. My parents had never let me work, insisting I focus on academics, though ironically, my efforts never seemed to matter to them. Now, I had no money and no safety net. My grandmother offered to help, but her means were limited. At 17, I knew I had to grow up fast if I wanted to survive. The first thing I did was apply for a part-time job at a local diner. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid just enough to cover small expenses and help out with groceries. The work was exhausting. Long shifts on my feet, dealing with demanding customers, but it gave me a sense of purpose. For the first time, I felt like I was contributing to my own life, even in a small way. Emotionally, it was a slow road to recovery. Therapy wasn't an option due to financial constraints, but my grandmother became my unofficial counselor. Every evening, we'd sit together at the kitchen table, and I'd share my fears, frustrations, and hopes. She never judged, never rushed me to get over it. She simply listened and reminded me that I was stronger than I felt. As the months went by, I began to think about my future. School had always been a safe haven for me, and despite everything, I wanted to continue my education. My grandmother encouraged me to enroll in a community college, and though the idea of walking into a new school where I knew no one was terrifying, I knew it was my best shot at rebuilding my life. The first semester was challenging. Balancing classes, work, and my lingering emotional wounds felt like walking a tightrope. But something incredible happened during an introductory creative writing class. For one of our assignments, we were asked to write about a moment that changed our lives. Without thinking, I poured my heart into the story of being kicked out, the betrayal, and the pain I carried with me. When I turned in the paper, I expected nothing more than a passing grade. Instead, my professor handed it back with a note scrawled across the top. This is raw, powerful, and honest. You have a gift. Keep writing. That single comment lit a spark inside me. For the first time, I saw my pain not as a burden, but as a source of strength. Writing became my outlet, a way to process everything I had been through and to turn my experiences into something meaningful. Encouraged by my professor's words, I started writing regularly, short stories, essays, and even poems. I submitted some of them to local publications and was stunned when one of my essays was accepted by a small magazine. The essay, titled The Strength to Stand Alone, detailed my journey of overcoming betrayal and starting over. Seeing my name in print for the first time was surreal. It felt like validation, proof that my voice mattered. With each publication, my confidence grew. I began to dream bigger, setting my sights on becoming a professional writer. By the time I graduated from community college, I had a small portfolio of published work and enough savings to transfer to a university with a strong creative writing program. At the university, I thrived. Surrounded by like-minded people who shared my passion for storytelling, I felt like I had finally found my place. I worked tirelessly, taking every opportunity to improve my craft. I attended workshops, joined writing groups, and interned at a local publishing house. Each step brought me closer to the life I had always envisioned. After earning my degree, I landed a job as a content writer for a digital media company. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me a foot in the door. From there, I started freelancing on the side, using my evenings and weekends to work on personal projects. Over time, my freelance work grew, and I built a reputation for creating authentic, impactful content. Eventually, I took the leap and became a full-time freelance writer. The freedom to choose my projects, to work from anywhere, and to share my voice with the world was exhilarating. I wrote for magazines, blogs, and even a few well-known websites. My essays about resilience and self-worth resonated with readers, many of whom reached out to share their own stories of overcoming adversity. As my career flourished, so did my confidence. The girl who had once been abandoned and ridiculed was now an independent, successful woman with a voice that people wanted to hear. I had built a life on my own terms, free from the toxic environment that had once defined me. Looking back, I often marvel at how far I've come. The road to independence wasn't easy, but every struggle, every sleepless night, and every setback taught me something valuable. I learned to rely on myself, to value my own voice, and to never let anyone else define my worth. The pain of my past will always be a part of me, but it no longer controls me. Instead, it fuels me, reminding me of the strength I discovered when I had no choice but to stand on my own. It had been years since I had heard from my parents. After they kicked me out, they had made no effort to contact me, and I had made peace with the fact that I was no longer part of their lives. Or so I thought. Then, one afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, and when I heard my mother's voice on the other end, my stomach twisted. She sounded uncharacteristically warm, almost apologetic. "Hannah, it's been so long," she said. "We've missed you." For a moment I was stunned. This was the same woman who had turned her back on me without a second thought. Why was she calling me now? My skepticism grew as she continued. "We've heard about your success. Your grandmother keeps us updated, and we're so proud of how far you've come." Pride? Where had that been when I was struggling to survive? I kept my tone polite but distant, unsure of her true intentions. "What do you want, Mom?" There was a pause before she spoke again, her voice softer. "We'd love to see you. Your father and Ethan have been talking about how much they miss you. Maybe we could all get together and reconnect." It didn't take long for the truth to surface. Beneath the surface of her carefully chosen words, I could sense desperation. They didn't miss me. They missed the idea of what I could do for them now. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet them, if only to satisfy my curiosity. We arranged to meet at a cafe in the city, and when I arrived, I found my parents and Ethan already seated. The sight of them made my chest tighten, but I held my head high. I wasn't the same person they had abandoned years ago. My mother greeted me with an overly enthusiastic smile, pulling me into an awkward hug. My father offered a stiff nod, while Ethan avoided my gaze entirely. "Hannah, you look amazing," my mother said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "You've grown into such a successful woman." I sat down, folding my arms across my chest. "Why am I here?" The question caught them off guard. My father cleared his throat, and Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My mother leaned forward, her expression earnest. We've fallen on hard times, she admitted. Your father's business is struggling, and with the economy being what it is, well, things have been difficult. And, I prompted, my tone icy. She hesitated before continuing. We were hoping you might be able to help us. You're doing so well now, and as a family, we should support each other. I couldn't believe the audacity. The same people who had thrown me out, who had turned their backs on me when I needed them most, were now asking for my help. And they had the nerve to call it family support. Ethan, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. Look, Hannah, I know things weren't great between us before, he said, his tone carefully measured. But that was years ago. We've all made mistakes. It's time to move on and focus on the future. I scoffed, shaking my head. Mistakes? You didn't make mistakes, Ethan. You made choices. You lied, manipulated, and destroyed my life. And now you expect me to just forget all of that. He looked taken aback, but my father interjected before he could respond. That's enough, Hannah. We're here to rebuild bridges, not dredge up the past. Rebuild bridges? I repeated, incredulous. You burned those bridges to the ground when you believed Ethan's lies and threw me out. You didn't care about rebuilding anything then. So why now? My mother's eyes filled with tears, but they felt hollow. Hannah, please. We're still your family. Families forgive each other. I let out a bitter laugh. Forgiveness? Is that what this is about? Or is it about the money? The demand for accountability? Their silence was answer enough. I leaned forward, fixing them with a steady gaze. If you want my help, it comes with conditions. My father frowned. What kind of conditions? First, I began, my voice firm. You admit publicly, to the rest of the family, to anyone who will listen, that you lied about me. You tell the truth about what Ethan did, how he manipulated you, and how you abandoned me based on his lies. My mother gasped. Hannah, that's... Second, I continued, cutting her off. You apologize, not just to me but to my grandmother who had to pick up the pieces after you threw me out. She supported me when you wouldn't, and she deserves an apology more than anyone. My father's jaw tightened. Hannah, this isn't necessary. It is necessary, I said sharply. You don't get to sweep this under the rug. If you want my help, you own up to what you did. Otherwise, this conversation is over. The tension at the table was palpable. My parents exchanged uneasy glances, and Ethan looked like he wanted to disappear. Finally, my mother broke the silence. Hannah, we're willing to apologize, but publicly? Isn't that a bit extreme? No, I said firmly. What you did wasn't just a private matter. You destroyed my reputation within our family, and you let Ethan's lies define who I was. If you want my help, you fix it. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. We didn't come here to be blackmailed. This isn't blackmail, I said calmly. It's accountability. They left the cafe without another word, leaving Ethan trailing behind them. I sat there for a moment, letting the reality of the situation sink in. I had given them a chance to make things right, but they couldn't face the truth. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need their validation or approval. I had built a life without them, and I could continue to thrive without their presence. Their attempt to manipulate me had failed, and I felt a newfound sense of closure. They had come back into my life not out of love, but out of desperation. And while I had no intention of helping them financially, I had taken back the power they once held over me. After that confrontation at the cafe, I thought I was done with them. But my parents and Ethan didn't give up easily. Over the following weeks, they sent countless messages, each one a mix of guilt-tripping and veiled threats. My mother played the victim, begging for understanding. My father's tone turned aggressive, accusing me of being ungrateful. And Ethan? He tried to act as though nothing had happened, sending casual texts as if we were siblings catching up after a long hiatus. I ignored them all, but when they began reaching out to extended family members, spinning a story about how I had abandoned them in their time of need, I knew it was time to act. They wanted to manipulate my reputation again, just as I had when I was a teenager. This time I wouldn't let them. I decided to take control of the narrative. If they wanted to involve the family, I would meet them head-on. I wrote a detailed email to every family member, laying out the truth in plain, undeniable terms. I recounted how Ethan had fabricated lies about me, how my parents had chosen to believe him without question, and how they had thrown me out with no regard for my well-being. I explained how I had rebuilt my life from nothing, with the help of my grandmother, and how they were now trying to use my success for their own gain. The email wasn't angry or vengeful, it was factual. I attached screenshots of their recent messages, including their pleas for money and their refusal to publicly admit their wrongdoings. I ended the email with a simple statement. I have worked hard to build a life of integrity and independence. I will not allow anyone, even my own family, to undermine that. I hope you understand my decision to maintain these boundaries. The responses were overwhelming. Many family members reached out to apologize for not stepping in sooner. Some admitted they had always suspected something was wrong but didn't know how to intervene. Others expressed shock and anger at my parents and Ethan for their behavior. For my parents and Ethan, the fallout was immediate. Their attempts to garner sympathy backfired spectacularly. Family members confronted them, demanding explanations and calling out their actions. The carefully crafted facade they had built over the years began to crumble, and for the first time, they were forced to face the consequences of their choices. My grandmother, who had always been my rock, called me after reading the email. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've shown them that they can't break you, no matter how hard they try." Despite the family's reaction, my parents and Ethan didn't let up. They tried to paint my email as an overreaction, calling it unnecessary drama. They even threatened legal action, claiming I was defaming them. But I was prepared. I consulted a lawyer, who assured me that everything I had said was protected as the truth. To protect myself further, I issued a cease and desist letter, warning them that any further harassment would result in legal consequences. The letter was a turning point. For the first time, they realized that I wasn't the scared, powerless teenager they had once controlled. I was an adult, capable of defending myself and holding them accountable. With the legal measures in place, the harassment finally stopped. My parents and Ethan retreated into silence, unable to maintain their facade any longer. While the pain of their betrayal still lingered, I felt a sense of closure. I had stood up for myself in a way I never could have imagined years ago. I had reclaimed my story and ensured they could no longer manipulate me or my reputation. The confrontation with my family wasn't just about setting boundaries. It was about finally letting go of the pain they had caused me. By holding them accountable and refusing to be pulled back into their toxicity, I had taken the final step in my journey to independence. In the years since, I've continued to grow both personally and professionally. I've built a life filled with people who genuinely care about me, and I've learned the value of surrounding myself with positivity and love. My story isn't one of bitterness or revenge. It's one of resilience and self-discovery. To anyone watching this who has faced betrayal or toxic relationships, know this: you are stronger than you think. You don't have to let the actions of others define you. Take control of your story, and never be afraid to demand the respect you deserve. Thank you for watching Unheard Stories. If the story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.